course, I guess the state's first entry into gaming was with the lottery, and it became apparent that sooner or later the riverboat thing was going to come around. We started preparing for that early on by trying to imagine how we could utilize those funds, how we would collect them, how we'd utilize them. And of course, a lot of that was controlled by state law. There wasn't much we could do about it, but we were following that as it was being discussed. The way the state adopted the laws is that it said very clearly that the head tax, which is what they were referring to, it was $2.50 head tax, was to be collected by and for whatever local government jurisdiction the boat was berthed in. Well, the first boat that came here was the Players boat, and that was in the city of Lake Charles on the lakefront. We kind of felt like, since there had to be a vote parish-wide to allow for gaming to operate, at least it was my opinion, that there ought to be some kind of sharing arrangement, that all the citizens that had a stake in that by voting yes or no, whatever they did, that there should be some kind of sharing. So I approached the then mayor of Lake Charles about that, and she quit talking to me for about 6 months after that. That was not a good plan as far as the city was concerned, and understandably it was feathering their nest, and they felt like that there were certain infrastructure improvements that were unique to them that weren't on anyone else's plate, and so that was not a plan that was going to work. Well, it wasn't long after that the parish began negotiating with a company that wanted to move a license from down east over here. It was Crown Casino at the time and developed into the Isle of Capri. And so we negotiated with them, and one thing we did differently than what the city did is we began looking at the possibility of having our revenue stream generated on a percentage of gaming as compared with a head tax. There were issues with the head tax that were hard to enforce, counters and stuff like that. The boats had to cruise every couple of hours, and so what happens when a guy gets off? He doesn't want to cruise, so he gets off the boat and he goes across the lake to the other boat. How do you do the head tax kind of thing? So we negotiated. We kind of followed suit with some of what was being done in Bossier at the time, and we did a percentage head tax. Ours was it was a unique negotiation because part of the access to the Isle of Capri boat, when they had one boat at the time, was through the town of Westlake, or city of Westlake. So Westlake was going to be providing water and services there. So we really needed to include Westlake in those negotiations, and those became fairly contentious. Westlake, I think, in our opinion, wanted more out of that than what maybe they were going to be required to, or what they really needed, and so they were contentious, but we worked it out. Then, of course, the second boat came, and we did another agreement with them where it really made them part of the agreement. The first agreement was simply us giving them some of our money. Well, the second agreement allowed them to actually buy into the thing. But over time, I think it was a better arrangement that we did with the percentages. In fact, when at some point when Players, I can't remember whether it was when they transferred, when Harrah's ended up acquiring them or sometime prior to that acquisition, that the city renegotiated their deal with them, and it became a percentage as well. It just seemed to be a better way to do it. We were kind of worried when in the early going, when the Isle first developed, by going to a percentage, we were a little bit concerned that some people might take the position that we had sold out in a way that was not going to produce an equal amount of money than what the city was getting on the head tax basis. So we actually put a clause, and this I credit Jerry Milner with helping with that discussion. We put a clause in our agreement with the Isle that said at any time that the extrapolation of the percentage to head tax was less than what the city was getting on the head tax, that the Isle of Capri would not only pay us what the city was getting, but they would pay a 15 basis point increase over that. So that way we were assured of never making less and always making a little bit more than what the city was making. So that was just one of those little wrinkles that I recall being put in there. It obviously changed the face, when Pinnacle came on. That was another negotiation that got rather contentious. The property that the port was negotiating with the company on, it was first Mirage, as a matter of fact, the Mirage Casino, and then changed to Hollywood Park, and then ultimately Pinnacle. But the negotiations during that period were interesting because the property that was going on at the time was unincorporated area. But the city obviously wanted to annex it. And the port, I think largely credit to Mike Dees, took the position that they weren't even sure that they could be forced to have their property annexed. There was a lawsuit several years prior to that where we attempted to put some zoning in place on port property, and I think cleared all the court systems and basically ended up that the port could do whatever they wanted to with the property and the parish couldn't put zoning restrictions on them. So it was a legitimate question perhaps, but it just didn't go there. What Mike was able to do was to say, okay, rather than us going through this contentious issue here, we're not going to question, city, your ability to annex us, but we think the parish needs to be part of the revenue stream here. And so we did. We worked out an arrangement that allowed that to happen. But it changed the face of a lot of things, of the ability of the parish and as well as the city to be able to do capital improvements in a way that could not have been done had we had to depend on bond issues or other types of things. And overall has, I think, had a pretty positive impact. I know I happen to be an individual. I don't mind saying it. I voted against gaming here. I felt like in the long run it was going to be it could create a something for nothing thing for our kids to kind of hold on to, the whole, get rich quick type thing. I felt like families might be decimated by the sickness sometimes that can come with gaming. I think there's been less of that than what I thought was going to be the case. And overall, I think the contributions financially to the community have at least equalized their way to whatever damages that they've done, since primarily most of the gaming funds are coming from Texas residents anyway. One of the worst proposals, I think, in my 34 years there that I saw was a proposal that was generated by one member of the police jury at the time, I think in 1996, that whatever the revenue stream coming from gaming was, it'd be put into a pot and divided equally 15 ways, so that each member of the police jury would have their own source of revenue to do whatever they wanted to do with it. Really bad idea. Fortunately, although there was some contentiousness over that, it didn't get anywhere. It didn't pass, and they developed a system of allocation for different levels of service, and some of which were for economic development projects. There was a certain amount of money set aside for that, so that it would be kind of the gift that keeps on giving. If you'd put money into a project that had economic development potential, that would have a return on it. There were other sources of funds put up that would allow for, in some of those projects, they could actually be paid back over time, so that there'd be a revolving loan fund, so that as money was used on an economic development project and had a return on it, that money would be placed back into that system. They did a recreation endowment fund. They took $1 million, the first $1 million they ever had from gaming, and set it up in an endowment fund, the principle of which was not to be touched. And that money has, since the mid-'90s now, the interest on that has been delivered to our recreation districts without any questions, without any, for them to use for capital improvements. We put a grant program in place that required that money that was given to special service districts or for any other projects for some other public agency that was going to help them, that they had to sign some commitments about how they would use that and how they wouldn't use it, and that they would be, they would certainly comply with all federal, state, local laws and everything else. So, and that they had to spend it the way they said they were going to spend it. It wasn't just writing blank checks to people. So I think, and the one commitment that has been in place since day one is that no gaming revenue would be used for operational funding. It would all be for non-recurring, either capital or equipment, some non-recurring type expense, so that they didn't get into a dependence role in the event that either ultimately gaming would be voted out or Texas would approve it and the revenue stream would go down. They were guarding that money. It was very wise, I think, for them to do that. Now, what evolved over a period of time is the idea of a gaming district. So this idea that I had promoted back in the mid-'90s that, went over like a submarine with screen doors, to share this money, it ultimately became true. We got a gaming district approved by the legislature to where all the money from gaming, including Delta Downs, which was another interesting thing with the potential Indian casino over there and everything else. But all that money would come into a big gaming pool, and a formula distribution having to do with a lot of different elements was going to fairly distribute that money with all the municipalities in the parish. Prior to that, the parish was giving money to the municipalities, but it was in a benevolent kind of way. We had the big checks and we were writing the checks, and I think in overall it made police stores feel pretty good to be able to give this kind of money to the municipalities. But the fact that was lost in that was that their citizens voted to allow gaming to be here also, and that perhaps they shouldn't be in the position of having to kiss the ring of the parish to get those kind of funds. They ought to be able to have those kind of funds because it was the right thing to do, and they were fairly deserving of that without having to ask for it or whatever. And so that's what this gaming district is allowed to do, and I think that was a big step. It started moving away from, well, that's y'all's boat, this is our boat, that's our racetrack and all this, and it became all of ours.